Good morning, everyone. I am Aditya Agarwal, a PhD scholar at NIBMG, and it is my absolute honor to welcome you all to the National Science Day 2025 at NIBMG. Today, we come together to celebrate the power of scientific discovery, the pursuit of knowledge, and the role of research in shaping our nation's future. National Science Day, observed on February 28th, which is today, it commemorates the discovery of Raman effect by Sir C.V. Raman in 1928, a breakthrough that earned him a Nobel Prize in 1930 and revolutionized our understanding of light scattering. His work stands as a testament to how Indian scientists can make a global impact, inspiring generations to push the boundaries of innovation. This year, the theme is Empowering Indian Youth for Global Leadership in Science and Innovation for Viksit Bharat. This resonates deeply with our mission. As India moves towards becoming a global scientific powerhouse, it is our responsibility to motivate the young minds to lead the way with innovation, research, and transformative ideas. Here at NIBMG, we are committed to advancing genomics, precision medicine, and biotechnology, ensuring that our contributions propel India toward the vision of a developed, self-reliant nation. So today's program is a celebration of scientific spirit, collaboration, and the incredible potential of Indian researchers. With that, I would like to invite our esteemed director, Dr. Sagar Sengupta, for the introductory speech. Please.
Thank you, Aditya, for setting the tone for of today's National Science Day. And let me first start off welcoming each one of you who have come from your place of education, the temple of education, and coming over here to spend a day with us. I am deeply thankful to you for making the journey. I hope this day you will be well spent, and as you grow older, you will remember this day for many years. So, as Aditya has already said, I already told you about why we celebrate National Science Day. This is the day to commemorate an extremely important event, and as he told, which culminated in the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1930 and made a indelible mark in the mind of every individual and made the country incredibly proud. But before we go into that day proper, let us just reflect a little bit about what is science and society as of we know it today. Science is not something which should exist only in the textbook. Science is not something which exists only in the laboratories. Science is something which exists on every day of our life, from the fact about the saving of the life when somebody is in danger, every technological breakthrough which the country and which the world has seen, the science is behind that. Nothing could have happened probably. The human nature, the humankind would not have made the advancements if there was no science today. So just reflect on it. The fact that you have come in a bus is because of somebody thought about converting the energy into a kinetic energy. That is a very basic of science which was done many years back. Science, and in extension of science, the technology actually connects us today. Many of you use your mobiles on a day-to-day life, and you know how much the world has become smaller for each one of you. The innovation propels us on every day of our life. If you open and search in Google, you will see the size of a computer which was a huge thing, a size of a mobile, which will not have fitted into any one of your pockets. Today, you can put it in the front pocket of your shirt. The innovation is not only there in the mobiles. The fact is, today millions of lives are being saved because the vaccines have come to us. We are able to save the life at every stage of our life. Of our life, we are saved. So many lives are being saved because of the national vaccination program, and how the people actually are putting in day in and day out to combat the unknown pathogens. And many of you and all of you have seen how the world has responded to the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. That is science. We respond, we beat it back so that it doesn't, and we hope, and we are always on the guard so that it doesn't come back again. Moving away from biology, you have seen India and by extension the entire world, how we are moving in the exploration of the space. Our own spacecraft Aditya is now circling the sun and understanding in great detail how the sun actually influences the entire solar system. And we have grand plans of sending missions not only to the moon, but also to the Mars. So this is science. The fact that you are able to communicate instead of waiting in front of a phone and saying hello, hello, communicate seamlessly in a press of a button to the farthest corners of this vast country is because of the science. So I have told you something about technology. I have told you something about the biology. I have told you a little bit about the cures, how science has helped. And science is continuing. It is not something which comes and goes away in one day. It is a continuous process of development. It is a continuous process of innovation. It is a continuous process of putting it back to the society what we have ourselves got so much from the society, and that's why we are where we are today. So coming towards the last part of my thoughts, what are the two most important things which I look at when I see my students coming into the PhD, or for that matter, when I would like to have the faculty members coming into this institute? The most important thing is the value of curiosity. The value of curiosity and how much critical thinking that person has. How much you are curious about it. How much you think about it. How much you ask the question about it. Why? Don't take things for granted. If somebody has written it down across and you have to follow it like a blind person. You're not like cows crossing the road. You are people and you have to think about it. That is the most important thing in a scientific world, the scientific curiosity. Think, and then only you can be able to cross the road and do things which will be having a meaning, a creative bend of mind. You will be able to contribute to the science, to the society, and in a way contribute to the humanity to which you have been blessed to become a part of. Let me end with a quote from a very famous person. His name, all of you know, Albert Einstein. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. I think this is one of the best quotes which I have heard in a long period of time. Question, explore, learn, and give back. Give back to the society which has given you so much. So this is with this, I hope that this science, the fact that you have come over here wanting to spend a day, we have opened up our institute to you, ask the questions, and I hope that this one day you will remember as you grow up. And someday, I hope some of you will join us as PhD students. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for your speech. Now, I'd like to invite Professor Analabha Basu for the popular talk for today.
Okay, thank you so much. Do I have to stand here and talk? So the microphone is not for you because I speak loudly. The microphone is for the fact that this talk is being telecast. So welcome to our institute and welcome to our institute in this wonderful day, which is the National Science Day. So I'd like to tell you two things. One is that today, because I'm giving this lecture in the National Science Day, which calls for scientific temper, which Professor Shaghu Gupta has told you that you have to question, test, analyze, and eventually communicate and give back to society. So when I give this talk, if you have a question, a pressing question, please raise your hand and ask me. All right. I would not like to lose you by the time when I start talking. So if you have a question, if you have difficulty in understanding something, please raise your hand and question. I would try to make this accommodative within this time period that I have been given. All right, so I'll talk about the human genome. And I have used this word called Cryptex. How many of you know the meaning of this word called Cryptex? Anybody? Have any of you seen or read the book called The Da Vinci Code? Yes? So what does Cryptex mean? So Cryptex means a portable vault or device where we store secret messages, right? And it has come from a combination of two words. One is cryptic, cryptos, which means hidden, and codex, which means a historical document or manuscript. So which means, if you go back to this story, that there is this vault within which there is this historical document which is stored, and it's like a puzzle. You have to decode this to understand. So our human genome is essentially a cryptex. It has a lot of information coded into it. And the information can be about diseases. If you understand it well, then you know a lot about diseases. You know that there are genetic predisposition to diseases. There are many diseases for which the genetics is important. But it is also important about a story that I'm going to tell you, which is slightly different, which is how you can use this genetic information to infer about our history and prehistory. So infer about the very basic questions of who are we, where have we come from? And this question primarily is very basic and fundamental, because if you go to any population anywhere in the world, they will all have an explanation of where they have come from, right? So those are explanations which are imaginations of individuals. But there is a scientific way of finding out where we really have come from. And this is a story about how we explore using genetics, and how genetics, like genetics has modified and revolutionized health sciences, how genetics has completely modified our understanding of history and prehistory, how it has modified our understanding of evolution. So let me start with this. You know the picture of this person, who this individual is? Yes, this is Charles Darwin. So if you look into Charles Darwin's notebooks, Charles Darwin's notebooks has this kinds of figures drawn, right? These are like, this is a species, and he writes, I think, which is very important. Scientists always think. So he writes this, that B, D, C, and there is something. So what do you make out of this figure? It is very intuitive. I mean, when you look at a figure like this becomes intuitive, which means that whatever are these, the branches on B, they are closely related. There is something which is D, which is slightly distant from this, but there are different variations of D, which are again closely related. So what Darwin is trying to look at, this is evolution, right? Darwin is trying to look at is that who is closely related to whom and who is distant from whom. And what is he using to trying to make? So he must have some measure by which he's measuring this, that which one is close and which one is distant. So he must have a scale. So his scale is morphology. Or how suppose these birds look like, these birds look close to this one. So they have these big sizes, so they are closely related. These birds look a little different, so these birds are slightly different. So these birds are D, D1, D2, D3. These birds are B, B1, B2, B3, right? So that's how you used to do, because that's the tool that was available at that point of time. Morphology was the most important thing. Now, there is something, so the other thing which he also did is something like this, which is that if you think about that B and D are like this, then he notionally thought that B and D must have some kind of a common ancestry at some point of time. So there was a bird, which was common ancestor to both of them, and then eventually from them, there was one branch which segregated, another branch segregated, this branch you call B, this branch you call D, right? So these trees oftentimes have something which is called a node, which is a common ancestor to this species. So this was great, this was morphology, and this was wonderful. But this changed, this radically changed in 1963. So earlier, what people used to do, there was a lot of things which people used to do. People used to get this, suppose fossils from different places. They used to use something called carbon dating. You must have heard, right? There are isotopes, and the isotopes have different kinds of. So they used to estimate that when this has happened. So there was these were things which are generally buried under the ground. So the archaeologists and paleontologists would get them out, and they use different kinds of dating methods to try and date them, how old these things are. Many of them have got extinct now. So in 1963, this lady called Margolish, she observed that the number of differences that you observe in a protein sequence of two species, so suppose you are looking into a shark and a whale, or a whale and a dolphin, and if you count the number of differences in some protein sequence, then that relates to what we know about when they had a common ancestor. Which means that there is somebody who is a common ancestor when the genomes are same, then they diverged, and on the process, the proteins acquired some changes for the shark, or for the dolphin, as well as for the whale. And if you count that, you can get an estimate of when this common ancestor existed. So this is something which you try to do. So suppose if you look at this, you can look at three individuals here. This, of course, is me. This is a chimpanzee, and this is an Indian cow, right? So if you look at them, then this is the kind of relationship if you look at, suppose, protein sequences between me and a chimpanzee. So if you suppose take the hemoglobin of me, the chimpanzee, and the cow, then my hemoglobin will be very close to the chimpanzee hemoglobin, but will be pretty distant from the cow's hemoglobin, right? And if you look at this and try to estimate the time, because we know that human chimpanzee separation, we had a common ancestor somewhere around 5 to 6 million years ago. And we also know that whoever tells you what, the cows are not very closely related to us. They are separated about 90 to 95 million years ago with humans, right? So we had a common ancestor about 95 million years ago. And how do you, and what would you observe? So if you observe, suppose, X as the number of differences between a protein, a hemoglobin of me and the chimpanzee, then this will be somewhere around 17X, either between the chimpanzee or the cow or between me and the cow. So there is about 17 folds more variance in the in whatever the protein that you are studying in the cow compared to me or the chimpanzee, compared to what we have between chimpanzee and me. So this is pretty simple, right? This is a unitary method. You have all done unitary methods. This is the number of differences that you have, and this is the number of differences you have. So this is like linear relationship. And this linear relationship is very simple, but it's very powerful in trying to find out things. So earlier, people used to do this using fossil divergence times. So they used to go and excavate fossils and do them with radioisotopic timing and dating them. So they would date everybody at different time points. And then the first work which people started doing is molecular divergence times, and people started seeing that the molecular divergence times and the fossil divergence times correlate very strongly, which means that this can be extended to further back in history. And later what happened is, imagine when this was happening, people's state-of-the-art technology, the gold standard technology for doing this was using was using fossil divergence times. But as molecular data started coming in, people started discovering that eventually the molecular divergence times are more accurate. How do you find this? Because you start finding fossils which are closer to this. So you know that it is possibly true that the molecular divergence times or the molecular estimates using the molecular divergence times are more accurate. So this changed the world completely. This changed the way we started looking at things. First of all, it is easy because many of these things are living, so you can just take proteins out of them and then count, and then you can estimate when they have separated. Now, this is a cartoon of a human cell which has a nucleus, and we have, and our institute is a genetics institute. We have the genes are within the nucleus. There is also a little bit of genes which is in the mitochondria, which we get from our mothers. Our mitochondrial genetic material essentially comes from our mothers. And the point is that proteins our understanding of proteins and the technology by which we deal with proteins are today's world is negligible compared to what we can do with genetics. So what we could do with proteins at this point of time, we could do much better with genetics, because genetics give us enormous amount of data, which also gives us enormous amount of power to estimate this very, very accurately. And one of the first things that people have tried to use is something like this. So you see that how we are trying to connect. We are trying to look at differences in our genetic sequences and then correlate that to our common ancestry. Now, what you could do with proteins and with animals and species which are which are separated at millions of years ago, now you can think of doing this with genetics to people who are separated only a few generations ago. So for instance, if you have watched Pather Pachali, then you know that these two are siblings, right? Because they are siblings and they get the mitochondria from their mother, then their mitochondria will be very, very similar, right? It should be almost exactly the same. However, if you take somebody who is, suppose, a Masai Mara individual from Africa, then that individual's mitochondria will be different. But if you can construct a tree like this, then you know that we had a common ancestor somewhere. There was one mother from whom there's this mitochondria which came along this line, and from the same mother, possibly the mitochondria came along this line, and eventually these two kids got the mitochondria from their mother. So if you can do this, if genetics can give you this, then you can actually reconstruct it at a much lower level or at a much closer level. You can also look at this at a level where these are just between different kinds of humans across the world. And that's what people started doing. And this is something which happened in 1987. Before that, there was a paper which showed that the human and chimpanzee are very, very close. We are about 99.5% similar to one another. But after that, in 1987, this is a person called Alan Wilson in the University of Berkeley. Remember this name, Alan Wilson? We'll come to Alan Wilson later. So what they did is they looked at mitochondria of people from all across the world and tried to construct how they are related. So if two individuals' mitochondria have small number of differences, then they are closely related. If they have a large number of differences, then they are distantly related. And they started doing that and found that this is a tree, as you can imagine. So these individuals are very closely related. Their mitochondria are like this. There are few differences between them. However, these individuals have are distantly related. They have many differences between them. So what they found was, in this tree, the mitochondria of people who were collected from Africa all came together in a separate cluster. And people who were from outside of Africa, they came together in another cluster. And this time remember, this is the time when there was a common ancestor to all of them. This time is much less than the time that is estimated here. Which means what? That the Africans had mothers or common ancestral mothers, which goes much back in time compared to all the other people outside of the world. So their common mother is a much more recent mother. The common ancestral mother, or the Eve, is a much more recent Eve. And eventually, the Eve to both of them goes further back in time. So this led to this understanding that human beings, they were in Africa for a very long period of time. We, the anatomically modern humans, we were in Africa for a very long period of time. And at some point of time, there were a small group of individuals who moved out. And this small group of individuals eventually populated the entire world. So we are all somewhere related to this very small group of individuals who moved out of Africa, and then a little bit more distant to eventually to some people who started our existence as anatomically modern humans somewhere in Africa in about 200,000 years ago. 200 to 300, that estimate varies, but this is what the story is. This story eventually has been supported by many other ways, which I cannot talk to you in great details, but it has been supported by archaeology, it has been supported by paleontology, it has been supported through genomics, many other kinds of studies, etc. People looked at pathogens like tuberculosis, which is obligate to TB, which is obligate to humans, and they found that if you look at the TB, then the African TB and the rest of the world TB looks like this. So it's a fascinating story. And then they went on. So they found that using the mitochondria, this is the African Eve, and they went on doing this, and it becomes clearer and clearer. So this is something which is called a hypervariable sequence in your mitochondria, and with that they found that these are the Western pygmies, the Eastern pygmies, the Kung speakers, and all of these are Africans. And as you can see, that the Africans are related to very long branches, whereas all non-Africans eventually come to coalesce somewhere here. Their common ancestor is somewhere here. The same thing with all mitochondria. So this is much easier to imagine as a tree. So hung this tree by our closest ancestor, who are chimpanzees, and these are Africans, and everybody on the vertical line are non-Africans. So see, all non-Africans coalesce to a common mother here. And this mother is like a sister to this people who are all from Africa. And the Africans have very long branch lengths. So they came up with two things. One is an estimate of the time when we started evolving in Africa and the time when we moved out of Africa. Turns out we are out of Africa only for about 60,000 years ago. I mean, we moved out of Africa only about 60,000 years ago. But we have been in Africa as anatomically modern humans for about 200,000 years. Now that's great. I mean, that is great. I mean, eventually we have understood how people have moved to different places. When they moved, at that point of time, it was ice age. So there was a lot of water which was trapped in this glacier, so people could actually walk all the way to here, almost all the way to Australia, and people went to Australia very early. And unlike other maps that you see, if you talk to a population geneticist, Africa is on the left, and everybody moves in this direction. That is because this is where it all started, and everything moves in here, right? And as you can see, I mean, we did not know too much about India, but eventually we also know a lot now. But I'm not going to talk about this. What I'm going to talk about is a slightly different thing, which is when they moved out, this was not vacuum in which they moved out, right? So the anatomically modern humans, they moved out, but when they moved out, there were people out there. They're hominids. And some of them are very well known, like the Neanderthals. Have you heard about Neanderthals? Okay, so the Neanderthals were there, right? And the Neanderthals were successful. They were big, strong, and they were yes. You don't have to stand up. Just shout. Neanderthal. So Neanderthal is like human, a hominid, bipedal, and we found the skeletons of these people. These are very close to humans. But the question, when people were studying this, they still did not know what is our relationship with Neanderthals, right? So these Neanderthals are a group of individuals whose skeletons were unearthed from different places in Europe. And people knew that the Neanderthals lived in Europe in around 40,000 years ago. Now, we moved out of Africa about 60,000 years. The Neanderthals were still living there. So they were still there, and we are moving out. So there has to be a conflict because we are very similar. We are bipedal. The Neanderthals had all kinds of technologies. They used weapons. They used stone weapons. They used to cook food. They used to walk upright on their two legs. So all of these were kind of well known. So which means that we would compete and fight against the Neanderthals in order to get access, right? In order to eat, drink, get access, we need to do that. And what happened was that after the humans started getting into places where the Neanderthals were, or the anatomically modern humans started getting into places where the Neanderthals were, the Neanderthals typically, generally, quickly got extinct. So people thought that we replaced them. Somehow we could replace them. And by replacement, which means that we either killed or over reproduced or did something which eventually wiped them off. But there were other group of individuals who thought that, how do you know that the Neanderthals are not us? I mean, maybe that there were these Africans who were here and the Europeans are actually descendants of Neanderthals, or somebody else is descendant of somebody else. And there were other kinds of hominids. There were people in China whom the people called Peking man, which is also like hominids, bipedals. And then there were other people there were skeletons of other hominids which people knew about. So there was this debate which was settled largely by the previous story that I talked about, that we moved out of Africa, etc. But the question of the relationship between humans and the Neanderthals, that always remained. And that brings Alan Wilson, whose story I have talked about, passed away, to meet somebody who was called Svante Pääbo. You might be knowing Svante Pääbo because he got the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2022. Nobel Prize in Medicine. And what was Svante Pääbo's contribution to science? So Svante Pääbo calls himself as a Neanderthal man. So he calls himself as a Neanderthal man because when he was a PhD student, this is the glorious, wonderful, glorious story of curiosity. So Svante's mother was an archaeologist. So he got a little bit of mummy. You know the Egyptian mummies? He got something of an Egyptian mummy. And the DNA is a very stable molecule. The DNA that we have in ourselves is a very stable molecule. So what Svante used to do in the morning during his PhD is to work in his immunology lab. He used to look into human immune systems, and very successfully so. And at night, he used to go to the lab and try to extract DNA from the mummy. So he would try to get things which would give you what? I mean, we could do this with living individuals who are living now. But if you can do this from somebody who has died long back, then it's an amazing thing. Then you can get something which has died long back and has been stored in a cave or in an ice place. Then you might get DNA out of that individual and get that individual's DNA as well and reconstruct history. So he was trying to do that during his PhD secretly. His PI did not know. His boss did not know. He would do this. And eventually, after his PhD in 1984, there were two papers which came up. One of this was slightly before this, which came up in Nature, which you might know is a very, very well-known journal. They published the best works, and this is about something which looks like a zebra but got extinct. But however, in an American zoo, in the San Diego Zoo of America, there was a zebra. There was this quagga which was stored, and the quagga's DNA could be extracted. So Alan Wilson's lab, you can see Alan Wilson's name here. Alan Wilson's lab got this ancient DNA from this quagga, which no longer exists, and tried to get the DNA out of this. And then Svante Pääbo, in the next year, publishes this paper, which is about molecular cloning of ancient Egyptian mummy DNA. So he gets the DNA out of this. And after his PhD, he publishes very well in immunology. He also publishes one paper, single author paper in Nature, which is about this. So he says that I have got DNA out of mummies. So Alan Wilson reads Savante's paper and tells him that Professor Pablo, this was early days, right? There was no emails. You find it hard to imagine. So he sends a letter to Savante Pablo and tells that Professor Pablo, you have done this wonderful work. I'd like to spend my summer in your laboratory. And Savante Pablo says that that won't be possible. This summer is impossible because you know what? I do not have a laboratory because I'm a grad student. So what I can do instead is I can go and join you in your laboratory. So that's what he did. And the next few years is what they said is like this. So there was this innovation trigger. So they came up with this, the mummy and the quagga. And there was this expectation which rose. So people started getting DNA out of everything. And people started getting DNA out of mosquitoes, which are frozen, which once bit a dinosaur, and they could get the DNA of the dinosaur from the mosquito, right? You know that this gave rise to this story, which you might have seen. Which film? Right. So this fictional things, these were real expectations. People started saying that we have got this. We have got this DNA from a mosquito, which has once bitten a dinosaur, and this DNA is this. All of this was wrong, obviously. So all of these inflated expectations were all wrong, and that's how science oftentimes progresses. And that is what Alan Wilson and Savante Pablo did for the rest of their times. The times they were together, which is they tried to prove themselves wrong, and they proved it. That whatever they did during this time point was okay in principle, but generally wrong. So they during the time point they were together in Alan Wilson's lab, they proved themselves completely wrong, but refined the process. So science continues to question. This gave them enormous amount of glory. They could have lived with that glory, but they actually, the truth, in search of the truth, they tried to start questioning themselves, what they have achieved. And that happened for a very long period of time. And eventually they found, well, Alan Wilson died. But Savante came back. And Savante got into studying Neanderthal people. And there were these Neanderthal bones which were at different places in Europe. The major was in Neander Valley in caves. And these caves are wonderful places where the temperature is such that everything gets stored. It's like a freezer, right? The DNA do not get damaged. There's not too much of bacteria which eats on the DNA. So nothing gets damaged. So he got this DNA and worked very hard, and for a long period of time still continuing to work to understand that what is the relationship between anatomically modern humans and what we call as Neanderthals. And ask the question, what really makes us humans and our relationship with Neanderthals? And eventually, in 1997, this is something which is known as a breakthrough of the year 1997. Eventually, they found the DNA from, they could get DNA from mitochondria of this Neanderthals. And they looked at it, and they came up with this thing which they compared with other individuals, other humans from different parts of the world, and they came up with this, that if you compare the mitochondria of a human and a human, then this is the number of differences you observe. So for some individuals, you observe 0 difference. For some individuals, you observe 1. For some, you observe 5. For some, you observe 10. On an average, you observe somewhere around 8 differences in the region that they are considering, right? When you compare two humans, and these humans are humans from different parts of the world. When you compare the human and a chimpanzee at the same region of the genome, then this is around the number of differences that you observe. But when you observe the human and the Neanderthal, then this is what you observe. Which means that what you knew is that the human and the chimpanzee had a common ancestor somewhere around 5 million years ago. This is a much closer cousin to us. This is much closer because we have fewer differences with the Neanderthal. So that's what they said. And this thing also take another leap when something happened in a more recent times, in 2009. And this is called a technological leap through something which has been discovered called the next generation sequencing machines. And in 2009, what people could do is people could, so this was the previous study, which was a breakthrough in 2007, in 1997, was using 379 base pairs. And this is about the entire mitochondria of humans and Neanderthals. So now you have the reference mitochondria of Neanderthals, right? You could get it completely. So now if you have my mitochondria and the Neanderthal mitochondria, you can compare them. Putting them together, you can compare them and count how many differences they have. And not only that, not only the mitochondria, eventually they got the entire genome of the Neanderthal. So this is 3 billion bases, 3 billion base pairs of Neanderthal genome. You have a complete reference sequence. So if you give your genome to me, I can take your genome and compare with the Neanderthal and tell you that you have this many differences with the Neanderthal. So the question that came now is that, okay, so we moved. We moved out of Africa, and when we moved out of Africa, the Neanderthals were there. Is it possible that we mated with them and had offsprings? Is it possible that we had viable offsprings? If that has happened, then our genomes may contain a little bit of Neanderthal DNA, right? Because when you have offsprings, you exchange DNA, right? The offspring will get the DNA both from the anatomically modern human and the Neanderthal. And then there are things which are like blending processes, which is called recombination. Over time, this DNA is passed on. So if I get my DNA, can I ask this question that, are there Neanderthal DNA into this? Now you have a reference, right? You know what the Neanderthal DNA looks like. So you might be able to compare this with the Neanderthal DNA and say that, okay, this part of my DNA actually looks like a Neanderthal. So can I ask this question now? Of course, people were starting to ask this question. And this was something which really was not like an inflated explanation, expectation, but there was really, really something which was happening. And people were getting DNA from many, many things, which is like strange things started happening. Like they were looking into a small bone which they excavated into one of these caves where the Neanderthals lived, and this is a small left digit of this finger of a young girl. And they took the DNA out of it. They did the sequencing for this and found this is not a Neanderthal. It looks like a Neanderthal, distant from a human, but it's not a Neanderthal person. So they call this as a Denisovan person because Denisova is the cave in which they found it. And this girl came to be known as a Denisovan. Imagine this. There was no skeletal remains of this. Nobody knew that the Denisovans exist. There was no skeletal remains, no archaeological, paleontological remains of this individual. Just a bone, a little bit of DNA. People thought that this bone is Neanderthal, found a completely new species of hominids. So this is where the power of genomics and the power of nucleic acids come from. And then they found, from the graveyard, they found an old 40,000 years old person, a girl. And that girl, mom is Neanderthal and dad is Denisovan. So the girl is a mating between a Neanderthal and a Denisovan. So now it really, really became interesting that the Neanderthals and the Denisovans could interbreed and have viable offspring. Can humans and Neanderthals, or can humans and Denisovans breed? And had we done this? So this went in various kinds of things. People got mammoths. You know, mammoths are like large elephants. They got extinct. People could get DNA out of mammoths and do the sequence of mammoths. So you might, at some point of time, really get a mosquito from which you might be able to get the DNA of a dinosaur at some point of time. So it is no longer science fiction. It really can happen. Anyways, so this was the Denisovan cave and the Denisovans and the humans. People looked at their DNA and found that the Denisovans are actually close to Neanderthals and a little bit distant from modern humans. And this is how our relationship is. So the question that we start asking again is what really made us humans. But now the question is that did we interbreed? Did we interbreed? Did we had viable offsprings? And this is what really was the story, that humans were here. There was there was chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans. Now we have DNA of Denisovans and Neanderthals. And this is a much closer time point. It is only about 600 to 700,000 years, which was, so anatomically modern humans, they came here about 200,000 years. It is only about 600 to 700,000 years when we diverged. So this was exciting, and people actually started finding this, that these are the Denisovans, and we really had a lot of exchange with this. So the replacement theory that was touted about, that when we came out, we replaced everybody, is no longer a complete replacement. It's a leaky replacement. So it leaked DNA. In a sense that if you take anybody who is non-African in this world, which includes you, me, and all of us, we have somewhere around 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA. It's 1 to 2% in Europe. It's slightly more in East Asia, and now we have this estimates from India as well, which is more than 1 to 2%. So it's more than 1 to 2% of our DNA is Neanderthal, and it has blended into your DNA in such a way that we cannot get rid of it. When you pass on your DNA to your next generation, you will pass on this small segment of Neanderthal DNA to your next generation as well. So it will remain 2% in however you look at it. Whenever you pass on your DNA, there will be 2% of Neanderthal DNA that you are going to pass on. And this is very, very uniform across Eurasia. All non-Africans have something of a little bit of this. But there was this, and people looked at the Denisovan admixture as well and found a little bit of this is also Denisovan. But the surprising element is that in Southeast Asia, this is where the Denisovan cave was. In Southeast Asia, there is a lot of Denisovan admixture. And there are many places where the Denisovan admixture can be as well as 3%. So the Denisovan admixture can be very, very high in some places. Now, has it just been an understanding of our ancestries and a story about how we have been? It is a little bit more than that. So this goes like this. So the anatomically modern humans, when they moved out into Europe, they faced a completely different kind of an environment, right? The pathogens were different, so the germs were different, so they would be getting sick, and you have to have an immune system which fights against your germs. The Neanderthals were already outside. So their immune system was already equipped to fight those genes. Now, is it possible that when we mated and had kids, our kids got something from the Neanderthal immune system which made them more equipped? Or immune system is only one example, but this can happen in many, many things. Are there things for which these people were very, very equipped, and we got these genes from them, which has made us more powerful in some ways, or our survival chances has increased due to that? And that's what people started looking at. And when people looked at the human immune system, and this is the HLA class 1, which is the most well-known segment of your genome, which is important for the human immune system, people say that this is got through admixture, possibly with archaic humans like Denisovans, most likely. And this looks much similar to what the Neanderthal DNA is compared to anything which is likely to be from anatomically modern human beings. So this particular allele is in very high frequency, and it possibly gave us a lot of strength to fight different kinds of germs and diseases. So this mating with the Neanderthals have actually made the anatomically modern humans stronger. This diversity in the immune system is actually very important to find different kinds of bacteria and viruses. But that's what has happened. And this was so powerful that from Europe, this was introduced to Africans. So the Africans do not have Neanderthal ancestry at all. But this was so powerful that this got introduced to Africans, possibly through back migration of the anatomically modern humans into Africa. There is another story which I'm going to talk to you and end my storytelling here, which is about a gene called the high altitude gene. So we all live in altitudes like this, which is close to sea level, which has a lot of abundant oxygen so that we can breathe. But there are some people in the world who lives in very high altitudes, and the Tibetans are one of them. And the Tibetans live in high altitude where the oxygen is limited, but they are very, very fit. If you have gone to the mountains, you might have seen them, right? You might have seen that they have enormous capacity to climb mountains, run, walk, where we are panting, right? And this is because of many genes. One of them is called super athlete gene, and they can do this without increasing their blood hemoglobin levels. And the gene, EPAS1 gene, is one which is one of the many genes which help them in doing so. And this particular gene which the Tibetans have is one which also the Denisovans have. So this is also something which we possibly, if you call it stealing, we stole it from the Denisovans, which has helped us in living efficiently in altitudes which are very, very high. All right. So I will end with this and try to give you a sense of what evolution is. So we go back to our trees. So these are anatomically modern humans. And then there was this branch of Neanderthal, a branch which came out. This branch bifurcated into Neanderthals and Denisovans. And this has not been something which is like an airtight chamber. We at different time points have exchanged material with these people. So this is our present day, this is our past, and this is a time point when we have exchanged all of this, which typically has made us fitter and stronger. And this has become a part of you and me, and we cannot get rid of this. The last thing which I would like to talk to you is about evolution. So this is something which is a wrong thing about evolution that we are taught, right? Evolution is not about this. It's not about this, neither is it about this. So evolution is not about a directionality that you do. Please be humble to this. Do not be arrogant that I'm built powerful compared to somebody else who was my predecessor. It's not that way. It did not work that way. Evolution is not that. Evolution is a lot of trial and error. There are chances that we survive, and there are chances that we eventually will not survive. And we have to be cautious about that. In order to extend our survivability, we have to be cautious about it. We have to think. Please do not think that the world is granted for you and you will survive whatever it takes. So this is what the story of hominid evolution has been. So here is the separation of the chimpanzees and the bonobos with the hominids. And see, there are so many trials and errors before we reach this place. This is only about 6-7 million years ago. And we reached this Homo sapiens sapiens about at this point of time. And we have lived through only this amount of time in history. Whereas there has been Homo erectus who are this successful. There has been other species or other cousins of us who have been very, very successful. So this is a time point we are here. Everybody else, all our other cousins have got extinct. But we need to be very, very cautious and think about this, that whatever you think is your superiority in this nature or in this world, do not give you a superiority to live through eternity. You might still kill yourself. So I'd like to acknowledge, of course, a part of doing science and a part of communicating science is to acknowledge the people who have done the work. So there are many, many scientists whom I really cannot acknowledge, but whom I would like to really acknowledge are this group of individuals. All of these people from this world, normal, natural people, you and me, from which people have taken this DNA, people have taken these proteins, and have built the history of all of us. And I will end with something which I cannot end with. The last word has to be said by somebody else. And I choose Maya Angelou to say this, that it is for parents. Here for parents, we stand as parents. Your teachers stand as parents to teach young people early on that in diversity there is beauty and there is strength. So if you are trying to give back to the society, do keep in mind that the society is diverse. It has different kinds of needs. You cannot only cater to one kind of people in this society, and that's not a great thing to do. And we all should know that in diversity, everything is like a tapestry where everything has value. Everything is value. Do not do a value judgment of this is better than that. This is what makes it superior to this, whereas diversity is all about valuing each other, which strengthens us, makes it more beautiful and nice to live. All right, thank you. So there hasn't been too many questions, but I'm open to questions now as well. All right. I don't think anybody has any questions.
Okay, thank you, Analabha, for this enlightening talk. Hopefully, the students are really enlightened with this talk. And thank you, Director Sir, also for your time. So now we'll move to the next. So if anybody has any questions,
Yeah,
don't be shy. It's okay. Any question? Any
science
stupid?
asked you to ask questions. Yes, please.
But the Neanderthals there, where they had bigger brains than the Homo sapien?
So see, the size of your brain is or the cranial capacity is one measure. But do not, I mean, it is important. It's a measure which is important, which has shown to has increased over time roughly, but it do not directly correlate to if you're trying to think about this as making an intelligent being, right? It do not necessarily correlate, which means that your brain might be a little smaller than my brain in size, but does not make me a little bit more intelligent than you, right? So brain size is important. It has over evolutionary time, it has increased. Does not necessarily mean that this is the one cardinal feature by which this is done. However, when you talk about Neanderthals, there are many, many stories about Neanderthals. And we think that the Neanderthals had all kinds of technologies which contemporary humans have. It is possibly not that we had superior technologies by which we eliminated or replaced them. It is possibly not true. And their weapons were as good as ours. And actually there's no theirs and ours here because we are also mixed with one another. But the weapons that they used to kill people or to kill animals were as good as ours. But there was a difference. The difference is that the Neanderthals possibly could not run as well as we do or throw things as well as we do. So our weapons sometimes had things which we could throw, but they were possibly stronger physically, so they had better access or heavier access which they could use. So there was a difference of this kind, which you have to infer from what you excavate to what might have been the reason behind that. And when you excavate, this is what you find. So they were very, very successful, but somehow this advantage of running and throwing possibly gave you some advantage. And there are many, many theories about this. They also might have language like we have. So as of now, if you look at their anatomy, if you look at the genes, if you look at their language genes, it looks very, very probable that they might have had language, as good a language as we have. So they were wonderful. And they were very successful, by the way, because if you look at them, if you look at the Neanderthals, they had lived for quite some time. It is not that they lived for a very small period of time. They lived for quite some time. It is almost the time we are on this earth. The Neanderthals actually lived around at least for that time point. Yes, somebody has a question.
Sir, what about Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus? Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus?
What about? We still haven't got DNA out of them. So we still do not know about too much. Using DNA, we do not know too much. So there is no new knowledge which DNA could have added to them. But yes, I mean, we know a little bit from archaeological evidences. So for instance, we know that at this time point, possibly we had fire. We have already had fire. It is also possible that the Homo erectus is the time point from which we might also have had language. So there are many people who think that the language has also been something which we have all inherited from the Homo erectus. Fire, definitely we had inherited from them. Because when the Homo erectus were there, they actually used fire. They could control fire. Not, I mean, using means control, right? They could control fire.
In some parts of the world, I have heard that there are some of the groups of tribes or other people who still wanted to be in their older versions and not in the technology world. So, are there any possibilities that we can find such species there?
See, science never rules out a possibility by saying that there is no possibility. But looks like it's very unlikely. There are places in the world, I guess, like very deep in Amazon forests where people still do not know whether there are people like living there. If you look into newspapers, there are sometimes, I mean, pretty frequently, people say that there are yetis in the Himalayas. Turns out most of these are fake news, and people have generally somehow tried to make a publicity out of things or played a prank or something of that kind. Or generally it is because of various other kinds of psychological reasons that people have seen. So there is no evidence per se, but again, I mean, can you really rule it out? I don't think so. Not yet.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions? No? Okay. So thank you, Analabha, for this nice talk. So we'll move to our next part of this. And before that, we'll take a group photo. Sorry if you can stay here. And then we'll divide 3 groups, all the students, because we have a lot of fun things to do. We have Genome Hall to explain this thing. We have Genome Museum, where we have the sequencer, how we do the DNA sequence and those things. And also we have many models to see. Okay, so let's have a group photo here, and then we'll divide the groups and distribute, okay? So group photo will be outside. We can go this door and this door, the outside side. Okay, please come.